All right, we're continuing on with our lessons, and today I'm going to teach a class on the saints. So, generally speaking, when we talk about the saints in the Catholic Church, we're talking about canonized saints. Now, the word canon just means law. So these are saints who have been declared by the church's authority, to be in heaven. These are people who have died, and we have declared that by their life, by the example of their life, that we know, again, this ties in with the authority that God gives to the church to know certain things, okay? To know that these are people who are in heaven. So what is a saint? A saint is someone who is in heaven, right? So they've died. And so what are the possibilities? A person can go to hell, or a person can go to heaven. The path to heaven can involve purgatory, the purification of their soul. But when we canonize someone a saint, we say that they are in heaven just because of the example of their life. Okay? All right. So, are the only saints, are the only people in heaven, are people who are canonized? Absolutely not. We just canonize saints so that we can recognize certain individuals as just ideal models for us, people that we can all look up to. Okay? All right. So, a saint is someone who is in heaven. Pretty simple, right? So, the question is, are you called to be a saint? There's only one right answer, okay? Are you called to be a saint? Now, that means here on earth, how we live our lives matters. We're called to live lives of holiness, okay? Saintliness, to grow in holiness. Holiness means that we're desiring to conform our life to God, to live close to God, to live the way God wants us to live, okay? The saints kind of give us some inspiration. Now, a couple things about the saints. We're going to talk about some of the canonized saints. When I talk about them, though, I don't want you to fall into the trap of trying to then copycat them, or looking at a saint and really loving the life of this particular saint. You develop this real connection with the saint, and so then you try to copy how they live their life. And that's not what God wants us to do. He wants us to be inspired by them, but to live our own life in its genuineness, the way God is calling you to live your life, right? So right off the corner of my camera, I think my camera's moving. Anyways, right off in the corner here, we have Our Lady. We have Our Lady of Guadalupe, Saint Mary. Saint Mary was called to live her life in a very particular way. You can imitate in certain areas of your life her example. You can call upon her. You can pray to her. But that doesn't mean that you're going to copy her and how she lived her life, right? That's not what God calls us to do. There's so many different ways that you can live a life of holiness, okay? All right, so just to make sure we don't fall into that trap. Now, holiness looks different. It really does. It takes into account your personality. It takes into account your circumstances of your life, because you can't control those things. You didn't pick your parents. You didn't pick whether you were going to be rich or poor. You didn't pick if you were going to live in Marysville or live in Phoenix, Arizona, or down in Jamaica. You didn't pick any of those things. So maybe as an adult you can pick where you live, but your circumstances, your family, your ethnicity, you didn't pick if you were going to be Vietnamese or Filipino or Gringo or whatever. You didn't pick any of that. So your holiness is going to be in the context of where God has placed you here on earth, okay? And to not try to change the things that God doesn't want you to try to change, but to grow in the areas that He does. So we all have weaknesses. I'm going to talk a little bit about mine and some of the saints that inspired me in that. You have strengths. You have strengths that I don't have and I will never have. that's going to tie into you living your life of holiness. Some of you are natural leaders. I am not, right? Some of you are naturally outgoing. Some of you are naturally compassionate and attentive in ways that I am not, okay? Some of you are very smart. I am not. Some of you have a gift with languages. I don't. All of those things don't necessarily mean that that's what makes a person holy, but a person can use that to live a life of holiness. Pope John Paul II, Saint John Paul II, was great with languages. He was incredibly intelligent. He was incredibly good with kids. He was the one who started the World Youth Days, right? Other popes were maybe did not have the same gifts as him, but they're saints too. So holiness is going to look different. Holiness will have certain attributes. People who are holy will have a deep sense of joy in their life because they know they can see what God is doing, right? So someone who's holy can see what God is doing, and that gives them great joy. There's going to be peace in their life, right? They're going to be generous. They're going to be courageous. They're going to be loving. Do you notice that these are actually on your exam sheet? These are the fruits of the Holy Spirit, right? And so they have these attributes, but they're just lived in different ways. Now, the other thing about the saints is that they are sinners. Yay, so there's hope for all of us, right? Because we're all sinners. But a saint is one who knew themselves. So we talk about this emotional maturity and spiritual maturity. They knew their weaknesses. And so they were always giving their weakness, surrendering their weakness over to God so that He could work even through their weakness, right? Okay, so they understood themselves, they became mature so that they could work on these weaknesses. So what are some weaknesses? Some people struggle with just being honest. It's just a weakness for them. It could be rooted in pride, it could be rooted in their insecurities, whatever it may be. They just struggle to be honest. One of my weaknesses is I love material things. I am fully American. I like things, right? It is a weakness, though. I can objectify things, and then when I begin to do that, I begin to objectify people, right? Or I begin to objectify myself. It's a weakness, but God can work through that. In fact, He can do beautiful things through that if we surrender our sinfulness over to Him, okay? So it's important to remember, saints, now were the saints, were they out doing like really horrible things? Were they out just one day they're holy in church, the next day they're out killing somebody? No. So they're not doing really horrible sins. They've grown in holiness, but they still struggle with their own weaknesses, okay? They still struggle with particular vices. Some saints had really struggled with their anger and their tempers, right? That was a weakness for them, okay? But then that becomes something redeemable and beautiful. All right. When we talk about the saints, one of the things that we talk about is ways that we connect with them. Okay? So saints are in heaven, right? Are saints alive? Absolutely. Okay? They're not, when they die, when a person dies, they're not gone, they're alive. So the saints are alive, right? They are in heaven, but they are alive. And they can see us. They can be close to us. Okay? This is all by God's grace, right? They're not acting independently of God. But they create, if we want to call it, the communion of saints. or I would put the family of saints, right? We're one big family. So all the saints that are in heaven are part of our family. So if you pray to a saint, you're doing it all through God's grace. But there's a particular person in our family, a brother or sister who's in heaven, whom you connect with, who can help you in some particular way. We're a family. And Jesus is not threatened by that. Sometimes our Protestant brothers and sisters, they get on us for worshiping the saints. We don't worship the saints, or praying to the saints. And it's like, no, we're a big family. God created us to be one big family. Okay? So when you pray to the saints, you're not worshiping them the way we worship God, but we are part of God's family. Okay? So God's not threatened by that. So we're a family, so we have this communion of saints, okay? They are alive, so we can communicate with them by prayer through God, by God's grace, okay? All right. Now, you're going to relate to some saints. You're going to feel connected to some saints when you pray, maybe because of personality. Maybe they have the same type of personality that you do. I'm reading a book about somebody, he's not a canonized saint, but about somebody I can really relate to him because when he was a teenager, he was just kind of a troublemaker. He didn't do really bad things. He wasn't out using drugs and drinking alcohol and partying. He wasn't doing those things, but he was just wild, and I can kind of relate to that. When I was a kid, I was just always looking for attention. And so I would do all kinds of things to get it. And there was one point in the book, so this is Father Guérin. I'll talk about him in a second. There was one point when he was a teenager, his dad thought he was just possessed by a demon because he was just so wild. There was a time when I was growing up, my dad said the exact same thing about me. So I feel a connection. Personality, right? Is that the only way we connect? No, but sometimes it feels edifying. Feels good to say, you know what, I feel connected to this person because for whatever reason, okay? All right, personality. The other is perhaps things that you're drawn to, so desires. So for example, let's say you want to be a nurse. There's some saints that were nurses. St. Catherine of Siena was a nurse, okay? But she was more than that too. But she was a nurse. And so somebody may feel a strong connection to her because of this desire to be a nurse. So a type of occupation, perhaps. Okay? Perhaps it's an ethnic connection. Right? So there's martyrs from Mexico. If somebody's from Mexico, they may feel a connection. Especially for teenagers who never grew up in Mexico, but that's part of your culture, that's part of your heritage, you may feel this real draw back to your homeland, right? To someone, a saint who was from that place. So an ethnic connection, maybe the Vietnamese martyrs or the oh, my brain just went blank. The Filipino martyrs, Saint. His name will come to me. I forgot his name. Anyways, but you may feel that connection. Every once in a while, so some of my heritage, my last name, Mactudis, comes from Lithuania. So when I hear about, people from Lithuania, my ears kind of perk up. It's like, oh, people from where my family was originally from, okay? All right, so ethnic connections. Sometimes it's just life experience. Life experience. Saint Maria Goretti, she was martyred when she was 13 years old, because a young man in her apartment complex wanted to rape her, or wanted her to consent to it, and she refused. And he said, "I'll kill you." And she said, "I'm not giving in. I'm not going to sin with you." And she would plead with him. She had this Christian love for him that she would not sin in that way with him. And so he ended up killing her. Now that's only a small portion of the story. But somebody may say, somebody who's been sexually abused may have a strong connection to Saint Maria Goretti and desire that courage as one who was victimized in that way and found a way to live a life of holiness. Okay? All right. So life experience. These are all ways that we can connect with some of our brothers and sisters who are in heaven. Now, as you're getting ready to be confirmed, you got it all written down? Okay, you can pause it, write it down. Okay? You got it right. You got it. Yeah. So for confirmation, you need to pick a saint that you feel a connection with, that you can take the name of that saint for confirmation. So for example, when I was confirmed, now my name, my legal name is Peter Gabriel Mactutis. Okay, that's my legal name. Gabriel's my middle name. But my name for confirmation was, I think my marker is going dead, was Peter, Francis. Okay? That was my name for confirmation. So what I did was I took St. Francis of Assisi's name as part of my name. Okay? Now, it's not changed legally. It's not on my driver's license, right? But in terms of my place in heaven, my place in God's kingdom, this is important. This is something, you get to choose this. Nobody gets to choose this for you. That's pretty awesome, isn't it? Okay. You get to choose your confirmation name. And it's based off of a saint that you feel some connection to for whatever reason there may be. Okay? All right. So, as I go through some of the saints and things like that, that's the objective. You're supposed to be thinking about that. Okay. Now, right before I started videotaping, this is driving me crazy. The camera's crooked a little bit. Anyways, right before I started recording, my camera fell off the table. So it's on a tripod, but I only had it on one table. Well, it slowly slipped and then fell off the table, and the little microphone receiver thing flew off, and the clip disappeared. It was gone. And I'm in the hall right now, and I couldn't find it anywhere. So, what do we do when we lose something? Well, we have saints who are intercessors. Intercessors. I think that's how you spell it. Intercessors. So an intercession is I pray to somebody asking them for some particular help. Okay? So for example, let's say I break down, my car breaks down, I have a flat tire. Who do you call? Well, Ghostbusters. No. Who do you call? You call a tow truck driver, right? Or somebody, let's say you need help with your tire. They're like an intercessor. There's somebody you calling for help or somebody for some particular need. So spiritually speaking, we have those people, right? Intercessors. When you lose something, who do we call? Who do we pray to? Saint Anthony, right? We've known him as the intercessor of lost articles. So I looked through the whole hall for this little metal clip that flew somewhere. I couldn't find it anywhere, and I looked at least 3 times. So finally, I needed to do this video, so I sit down and I say, okay, I'll just use a rubber band. So I'm getting ready, I'm sitting down, I'm writing these things down, and then I'm also thinking, okay, St. Anthony, I don't want to bug you over this dumb little metal clip, but I can't find it anywhere. So if you got some time, so I'm writing my little class, and I'm writing down, and then out of the corner of my eye, I look, and right next to me, right on the ground, out in the complete open, the clip is just lying there. It's like, thank you, St. Anthony. Okay? So he did his job. I hate to bug him for stuff like that. But anyways, St. Anthony. So one of the things that we know him for is he helps people who've lost items. Now, there are people who've lost things much worse than the clip on their little microphone. Okay? So he desires, though, to help us in a particular way. Intercessors can be because of for healing, for particular illnesses. Okay, now do you ever use Wikipedia? Wikipedia, if you go to Wikipedia and you type in Wikipedia, and you type in patron saints, it's going to come up with lists and lists and lists of saints for different things. Now, there's saints for occupations, there's saints for particular illnesses. So I just have the list here. So, there's so many saints. I don't even know how to pronounce their names, some of them. So saints for immigrants, San Lorenzo Ruiz. Okay, he was the Filipino saint I was trying to think of. He's a patron saint to people who are poor, of immigrants, migrant workers. Okay, Saint Lucy's patron saint to people with eye problems. Her name actually means light, right? Okay, so Saint Maria Goretti, I had mentioned her. She's the patron saint of rape victims, crime victims. Okay. Saint Maurus, patron saint of those with epilepsy. Saint Maximilian Kolbe, patron saint of people struggling with drug addictions. Okay, so maybe you know somebody who's struggling, so you say, okay, I'm going to pray for that person. I'm going to sick Saint Maximilian Kolbe on that person, or whatever it may be. Okay. Saint Michael the Archangel, he's the patron saint against temptations. Okay. All right, so there's just lists and lists. So you may find a connection of a saint given something like that. Okay. Saint Diphnna, she is the patron saint of people with mental problems, but also she's the patron saint of psychologists or psychiatrists. All right. Okay. So different saints as intercessors. Some of those, if those of you who are, if they're a fisherman, St. Andrew is a patron saint of fishermen. St. Bridget of Ireland is the patron saint of scholars. St. Blaise is the patron saint of veterinarians. St. Clare is the patron saint of actors and actresses. Okay? All right. Just little examples like that. So you may find a particular connection through that. Okay? All right. So you can go to Wikipedia. That's one resource. I think Selena's going to give you a couple other resources of ways to look up saints. All right. Now, when I was younger, my parents had lots and lots of saint books in the house. We had like a whole library of saint books and just holy books. My parents were really wonderful to us in that sense, that we were surrounded by faith. We were surrounded by that growing up, okay? Now, I remember when I was a kid and I was growing up, there was one particular book that I really liked, and it was on St. John Vianney. And he is the patron saint of diocesan priests. That's like me. I'm a diocesan priest. I'm a priest who works in a diocese, who works in a parish. He's the patron saint of diocesan priests. Well, this book was for children, and on the cover there's a drawing of what he supposedly looked like. And I really liked it because he was tall. He was handsome. He had a full head of hair. He was muscular. You can imagine him just being impressive in that Hollywood sense, right? In the vain sense, superficial. When I saw a picture of what he actually looked like, he was short, super skinny, big hooked nose. He had this weird hairstyle that was, I guess, indicative of his time. Not very handsome, okay? And so when I first saw that, it was like, oh, I don't want to be like him, right? Or I even looked down on him because of how his physical appearance. There was something that had to be purified in my heart. I was being very superficial. I was being vain, okay? And so what that did was it forced me to look deeper inside myself and see how vain I was and the ways that I was concerned about how people looked at my appearance or whatever that may be, what other people thought about me. And I realized that holiness is so much deeper. I often think that a lot of our saints are not physically attractive to challenge us out of our vanity, okay? So often we measure value of people based on vanity, based on how they look. If you look at Hollywood and you see pictures of women in Hollywood, 99% of them, it's all based on how beautiful they are, or the men, how handsome they are, right? And as that goes away, if they lose their physical beauty or if they lose their physical handsomeness, then they're out of the limelight. Then they're not put in the movies. They're not the superheroes in Hollywood anymore, right? Because Hollywood is very superficial that way. In the church, we're not judged based on our physical appearance, nor does God judge us based on that. And so St. John Vianney, physically, he was not very impressive. But as I have grown in holiness, and in some ways, I look to him and I see hope for all the weaknesses that I have. St. John Vianney was not the most intelligent. He struggled with Latin. He could not learn Latin. So they had to make all kinds of exceptions for him in the seminary because he just couldn't get it. And he felt so dumb because these other little kids could get it and he couldn't. He was in school when he was older with a bunch of little kids because of some things that had happened during that time. And the little kids would make fun of him. And he would always just say, you know what, you're right. This is just not my gift. But he was very humble. And he kept working at it. And he kept working at it. And he kept working at it. One of the reasons I really love St. John Vianney is because I can relate to that. There's some ways I just really struggle. But I figure, you know what, I'm just going to keep working on it. In God's time. In God's time. Okay? So, St. John Vianney, one of the things that he did also was that in his parish, he started a free school, a school that's free for orphan girls in the community. And so during that time, there was probably other schools, and there were schools for the kids who had some means, who had money. But he wanted a school for girls that could not afford an education. And so he asked some women to basically volunteer. They had to give their lives to this school. And so these two women offered to basically give their life. So they never married because they promised to always be there for these girls. And they created this school, and they didn't charge any tuition. And the school became so good, not just academics, but I mean, it was such a loving environment because of these two women that even the rich families wanted to send their girls there. And they were offering to pay anything to do it. And St. John Vianney said, you can send your girls here, but you can't pay anything. Because I don't want the orphan girls to feel like they're any less than the rich girls. And so everybody sent their girls there for free. Because he wanted all of them to have this dignity, this equal dignity. That is so beautiful. I felt so inspired by that. And so I've always wanted to start something similar, kind of like that. Or to be able to envision ministry the way he did. Okay? So that's an example of, for me, being inspired by my patron, St. John Vianney, as a diocesan priest. St. Francis, when I was a teenager, when I was a kid, I looked up to Francis because he loved animals. And I liked animals, right? That's not why he was a saint. He was a magnanimous saint. He was a person who drew the attention of people immediately because he would come into town dressed in rags. I mean, literally in rags. If I remember, I'm going to put up a picture on the video of one of the garments that he wore. I know I'll forget, but I'm just saying. And he would come into town dressed as a complete homeless person, barefoot, nothing on his feet, begging, because he had no money, right? The Franciscans had no money back in those days. But he would draw people in because of his love, because he was so approachable, because he wasn't over anybody, because he was beneath everybody. Everybody felt safe with him. He was also free. He was free just to be himself. He was free just to be poor. He didn't need anything to do what he did, to preach the gospel and just to be present to people, to pray to be in love with God, to love his neighbor, right? And so later on, I fell in love with Francis again because of his freedom. He didn't need material things to be who he was, to be a saint, to be in love with God, right? To be in love with people. And I admired that, and I hope one day to be able to grow, because that's one of my weaknesses. Okay? I talked a little bit about Saint Maria Goretti. I love Saint Maria Goretti because the man who killed her went to prison. She appeared to him in prison. This is, I think, years later. And she handed him this giant bouquet of white flowers. Now, white flowers, the symbol of white, is purity. And what she wanted, thinking of intercessors, she wanted him to know purity. And from this vision, this apparition that he had, he changed his life. And later, he would leave prison, and he would live a very different life. He lived a very humble life. He served some monks in this one particular area, and he just became a servant to them. When she was being canonized by the Pope, this simple little girl, right, teenage girl, he was standing next to her parents at the canonization mass. And so what I love is the forgiveness. It's the victory of forgiveness that changed his life, that took him out of the grasp of Satan and helped him to be who God called him to be. And so what I love is her story for me is a story of how the courage of one girl can help us to see inside the dignity of every single person, no matter how bad they are right now, but to know that God can change that and to not give up on them. That's what I love about her life, right? Okay. Saint Bernadette. Saint Bernadette was, she became known as the one who had the vision of Our Lady of Lourdes. But when she was a teenage girl, she was not the smartest girl in class. She was often picked on and kind of ridiculed because she was very slow in learning. So maybe you can relate to her in that sense. You say, oh man, I'm slow, so slow. I hate math and I hate school and I'm just not very good at it. And, she wasn't very good at it. So maybe you can feel a connection there. When she had these visions, though, nobody else could see them. And so a lot of people thought she was just mentally ill. They didn't believe her. Now, as teenagers, you ever feel like, people just don't respect you? They don't trust you? They don't consider you their equal? You might be able to relate to that, okay? But she was so simple in her love for God that she would just obey. She would just do whatever God asked her to do, she would just obey. And that simple trust eventually won over all of Europe. It was amazing how this simple girl, and she was very poor, her family was very poor, right? But she would win over so many people in that simple trust. There's another saint, Saint Denise. Saint Denise, so she was, again, a teenage girl, back in the very early church when it was illegal to be Catholic. This is during the Roman Empire. And she heard a man apostatize. So there was a Catholic man who renounced his faith because he didn't want to die, because they were going to kill him, right? She was so incensed by it that publicly she went and denounced him in front of everybody, knowing that that would mean that she probably herself would die, right? But she just had this courage, and I love that. Okay, I love that. She's also the patroness of people who have been in motorcycle accidents, which is kind of odd. But I had an accident on my motorcycle last week, a little accident. So it's like, oh, okay. And I have a patroness, Saint Denise, right, in that. Okay, all right, anyways. One last saint for today. Now, this is not going to be the last video on the saints, but one last saint today. I'm picking my favorites. I'm sorry, I'm being narcissistic about it. Saint Damien of Molokai. So Molokai Molokai, I think that's how you spell it, is an island in Hawaii. And there was a time when leprosy, so leprosy is a disease of the skin, where the skin, the flesh, not the skin, but the flesh of the body begins to die, begins to rot before the person is even dead. Okay? So it's a horrible, horrible disease, because when our bodies die, when we die, they begin to smell horrible and rot, right? So people were getting this disease. And so when they had the disease somewhere else in the Hawaiian Islands, they would be put on a boat and sent to Molokai, to the leper colony. The problem with the leper colony was that there was lots and lots of sin, because people had given up. They thought God had abandoned them. There were no priests there was no religious, there was nobody. They had no family, because the family couldn't come to visit them. Maybe we can relate to this with the coronavirus, just this feeling of isolation, right? So the bishop goes to his priest and he says, we need to send a priest out there, because it's just hell. Adults were abusing kids, and it was just a really bad situation. So 3 priests volunteered, and Damien was one of them, Father Damien. So they sent Father Damien to be the first, and they would rotate. But when he got there, the very first thing that they did was they tested him to see whether or not he really loved them. Was he just going to come there and just act like he loved them? Or was he going to become one of them? And so he knew he could never leave. That if he was to win over their hearts, if he was to give them hope as they're dying of this horrible disease, if he was to help them see God, he could never leave them. And he showed them that kind of love. He would eventually die from leprosy. Okay? You can see actually pictures of him. We have pictures of him. So Saint Damien is not the only saint from Molokai, from the leper colony. As he was dying, there was a nun who came with her order. She was a Mother Superior, and I always forget her name. Her name begins with an M, not Mary. I think it begins with an M. Anyways, I'm forgetting her name. But she would follow St. Damien, and she would do the same. They would just show this incredible love to these people who are dying, the kids, the adults, and they brought the light of Christ. They gave people hope. So I love that. I love that. Okay, these are a few saints. We're going to continue with this. This is part 1 for the saints. Go to Wikipedia, and then Selena, I think, will give you some more resources, and we'll continue on with this, okay? All right, God bless. Bye.